Okay, so we are in lesson 8 of the winter quarter. The title of our lesson is Solomon's Decline. Scriptures covered will be 1 Kings chapter 11 and 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 29 through 31. And we start off with section A, which is Solomon's slide into idolatry. Now, we mentioned this in the past lessons. We've had several lessons on Solomon. Solomon made a request that pleased the Lord very much. He asked for wisdom to rule. The Lord gave him wisdom, so much wisdom that he was the wisest man ever living other than Jesus Christ. And he also gave him what he didn't ask for, which was honor and wealth in great abundance. And that is what we have looked at in the last couple of weeks. And we noticed that there were some inklings with Solomon that he was not paying careful attention to the Mosaic law. There were just inklings. But now we'll see disaster strike. Okay. So can I get somebody to read verses 1 through 8 of chapter 11? Okay, thank you. This just starts out with Solomon loved many foreign women, and then he lists several pagan nations surrounding Israel. And then it says the number of women, which is 700 wives, princesses, and then 300 concubines, so that's a total of 1,000. So this took some time. This had to have taken some time to build this, menagerie of ladies. Yeah. So now, this is a proverb that Solomon himself wrote. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. Then we've reviewed Deuteronomy chapter 17 several times, but it says what the kings of Israel are to do. They're to copy the law. They're to read the law every day. And it says specifically of the kings not to multiply wives or personal wealth or horses. And, we've talked about that in lessons past, but Solomon obviously was not adhering to that very closely. And then in Exodus 20, and this is verses 2 through 6, this is from Mount Sinai. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. First law. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So if you look at verse 2, remember back in lessons past, we learned that Solomon loved the Lord. It tells us in his early reign, remember he started roughly 20 years old. It doesn't tell us exactly, but you can figure that out by the dates of David's reign and the place of Solomon in Bathsheba's number of kids she had. So verse 2, the end of verse 2, it says, the nations concerning from which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. And then it says something very significant. Solomon held fast to these in love. In love. So that is the definition of idolatry. Solomon loved his wives more than he loved God. And that is idolatry, when you place your affection on something more than where it should be placed. That makes you want to please the object of your love. And that's what he's doing. So, yeah, most of these wives were not initially for emotional reasons. They were for political reasons, to solidify his power. Now, was that necessary, do you think? Yeah, I mean, the Lord warned against political affiliation also with pagan nations. And, I mean, we can see that the Lord is able to protect anybody he wants to protect. And, I mean, if you look back at Genesis 35, this was right after Levi and Simeon had annihilated a city because the prince of the city had raped their sister, Dinah. So they annihilated the city, and Jacob was afraid that they were going to come and get him. So he left that area, and he says, as they journeyed, this is Jacob and his family, there was a great terror upon the cities which were around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So the Lord is perfectly capable of protecting a country or anyone. And these political alliances were unnecessary, and this was Solomon's worldliness. He was thinking like a, and that is the thinking of the world, and that is what the Lord is trying to teach us not to rely on, and that is why Romans 12 verse 2 says to renew your mind. And by the way, that's why our church is reading through the Bible together. This is a plug. And the schedule is on our website under events, and you can pick up right where you are right now. You don't have to start at the beginning. But that's what we want to do, renew our mind so that we have God's blessing. But yeah, I mean, Solomon, he probably didn't even know all his wives. I calculated if he slept with a different woman every day, just once a day, if it, yeah, it'd be 2 3/4 years to get through them all. And that would be tiring. One every day. And then it makes you wonder, he had a copy of God's word. Did he ever read Genesis 2, verse 24? Or a man shall leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. He wasn't reading that. Well, he was wealthy beyond imagining. He had enough money to support them. The issue is not, is it possible? Worldly, in a worldly way, it was possible. The issue was, is that what God wanted? And that was clearly way out of line. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that Solomon wrote the Proverbs, wisdom literature. He wrote the Song of Solomon, which we have recorded in the Bible, and then he wrote Ecclesiastes, which I think was probably after he had been involved in this for a while. Exactly. So, and that is why we're in our little class here. So now this restriction that was incumbent upon Solomon is also incumbent upon us in the church. So 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be bound together with unbelievers, for what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Christ with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? Or what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as God said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says the Lord, and do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you. So we, if as believers, we have a limited choice of spouses. They must be believing. And that mandate is flaunted today, maximally, even among Christian families. And they pay for it because your love is on your spouse. And if your spouse does not love God either, that will drain away your affection to God. And there, it's like a law, So That's the issue. So section B, God predicts the divided kingdom. That is 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9 through 13. Can I get a reader for that one? Thank you. Okay, the Lord has emotions. He's an emotional person, and he created us in his image. We have emotions. He has emotions. And this emotion that Solomon engendered in the Lord was anger. The Lord is angry with Solomon. And, he says, very few people get to experience what Solomon experienced. God appeared to him, I'm assuming visibly, as appearance is related to sight, twice. He appeared to him twice. And then he also sent messages through prophets to Solomon. In the appearances were chapter 3 and verse 5. That was when he was contacting him about his request. What did he want? And then chapter 9, verse 2, after his dedication of the temple. Both of those times, he warned Solomon. He didn't just tell Solomon. He warned Solomon. He says, if you obey me, I will bless you. If you disobey me, the curses of the Mosaic covenant will come into effect. The Mosaic covenant was a blessing and cursing type of covenant. For obedience, blessing. For disobedience, cursing. And it was written out at Sinai. And Israel said, yes, we agree to that. And so it was written in the contract. Yeah, and remember, at the beginning, Solomon was godly. I know. He was following the Lord, and he was doing this, and we just get little inklings here and there, right? Oh, well, wait a minute, he married Pharaoh's daughter. I don't know about that. And then, we get little inklings that, well, maybe, and then we hear this, these reports of overwhelming wealth and people flocking to him to listen to him, and the Queen of Sheba just being overwhelmed by his wisdom and his glory and the temple, and he's human like us, and his head is going to blow up. That's a good question. So the question was, so what are some modern day idols, and how do you know that if your attachment to the Lord is waning? What do you think? What are some modern day idols? Entertainment. Oh, yeah, the computer. Okay. Material playthings. Material playthings. Yeah. Fame. Yeah. And that was one that was affecting Solomon, right? Too. Yeah. I mean, basically, it hasn't changed. No. Yeah. So how do you know when your attachment to the Lord is weakening? That's why the Bible is so important, because the Bible refocuses our mind. We live in the world. We watch TV, at least I do. And we can be affected by the world. And if we're not reading God's word and renewing our mind, we begin to think as the world thinks. And the world's goal is to get people to forget God, to think God is unnecessary. So the Bible is extremely important. So again, we're reading through the Bible this year as a church, and we want everyone to join us. So, see, God gave Solomon the kingdom, even though Adonijah probably, from a worldly viewpoint, had a greater claim to the throne because he was his older brother. That is why when Adonijah asked for Abishag as his wife, Solomon immediately recognized that was a threat to his throne, because that would solidify his claim. But God sovereignly chose Solomon as the king. And that, again, when Solomon went and did all this stuff, made the Lord angry. Then verse 11, The So the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you. So this verb to tear is pretty rough. It's rough, okay? And that verb was also used with King Saul by Samuel. Samuel said, the Lord will tear the kingdom from you and give it to someone better than you. So basically, Solomon had been warned numerous times. His father had warned him about keeping the Mosaic covenant before he died. God had warned him twice about keeping the Mosaic covenant before he died. Well, God didn't die. But he'd warned him twice. And then also Solomon, during his dedication prayer, committed himself to keep the Mosaic covenant. And he failed. So, this is terrible, and this is worse sin than Saul committed. Saul took the role of priest because he couldn't wait. And the armies were gathering. He was getting nervous. His army was starting to defect. Samuel hadn't showed up. So he took the role of priest, and he offered the sacrifice himself. And for that, God took the kingdom away from Saul. This is much worse. And yet, verse 12, nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. So the punishment was not as great for Solomon as it was for Saul, because he was the recipient of the Davidic covenant. He was in the line of David. And so God had obliged himself to maintain that line, irrespective of the performance of the kings. And that's why there's still going to be a Davidic king. Otherwise there wouldn't. This is reminiscent of the believers' contract with the Lord, the Christians. We have an unbreakable promise from God. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, you will be saved. That's a one-time deal. Bang, you're saved. You're going to heaven. Okay? It cannot be undone. But he also calls us to follow him. He wants to use us to bless other people in our lives. So what can be lost from the believer due to sin? See, you choose the sin. This is interesting. We'll see later. It's your choice. The sin is your choice. The consequence is not your choice. And things can come at you from places you don't expect. And that happened to Solomon. And I think that's true of all of us, right? If we sin and consequences start, we'll think, I did not expect that. So you choose the sin, but you do not choose the consequence. That's up to the Lord. And it will probably be something unexpected. So what can we expect to lose by sin as a Christian? Fellowship with God. Intimacy. Intimacy. Yes. Fellowship with God. Yeah. Yeah. And that is not because he hates us. That's because he loves us. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think in relation to prayer, a sinning Christian loses their power in prayer. Because the Lord says, if you have sin in your heart, I won't regard you. Okay? So you lose your power in prayer. You lose your desire for prayer. I've sinned. And I was almost afraid to pray. Yeah, I was almost afraid to pray afterwards. So you lose your desire for prayer. You lose your desire for fellowship with other believers. Because you're ashamed. Yes, because you're ashamed. You lose opportunities for service. You can lose opportunities for service. You can lose physical health, okay? You can lose healthy relationships. Your relationships can be destroyed. Yeah, you can lose your reputation. Think about Jim Baker? Yeah, Jim Baker. Jimmy Schwagert. You lose your reputation. You lose you're not effective for the Lord, and you can lose your life. And there are examples of that in the scriptures, of people losing their life, believers losing their life, going to heaven because of sin. Yeah. So one of our people pointed out that not all bad things are due to sin. And that's true. So yeah, I mean, for example, the Job is probably the main one where Job did learn through that God is sovereign. Yeah, Job did learn. Also, Paul was sent a thorn in the flesh from Satan, and that was not because he sinned, but to keep him from sinning. It's to keep him from sinning because he'd had these great revelations and to keep it from going to his head. So not all, I don't want, especially online, I don't want people to think that if bad things are happening to you, if trials are happening to you, it is always due to sin. But I do think you should think about it, because it can be. And if you check your mind, am I sinning? No. Okay. Then I will trust the Lord for this trial. Okay, so this is good stuff, huh? Okay, so section C, God raises external enemies. So we see the problem. The problem is idolatry due to, associating with a lot of foreign women. A lot of foreign women. Yes, so it was pointed out that Solomon started something that ended in the deportation of the northern kingdom in 722. It ended with the deportation of Judah to Babylon in 586. And from this time on, Israel was plagued by idolatry. And they never got over it until the Babylonian captivity. So Solomon is plunging the nation into disaster here. Well, look at verse 11. Was that the one? Let me see. Oh, no, verse 12. Nevertheless, I will not do it, tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands, for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. So Solomon benefited from David's faith. And I think that will apply to us. If we are faithful, our children will benefit. They will benefit from that. Okay, God raises external enemies. That's 1 Kings 11, verses 14 through 25. Want me to read that one? Then the Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal line in Edom. For it came about when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain, and had struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel stayed there 6 months, until he had cut off every male in Edom. That Hadad fled to Egypt, he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him, while Hadad was a young boy. They arose from Midian and came to Paran, and they took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him food and gave him land. Now Hadad found great favor before Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tahpenes the queen. The sister of Tahpenes bore his son Genubath, whom Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab the commander of the army was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Send me away that I may go to my own country." Then Pharaoh said to him, "But what have you lacked with me, that behold, you are seeking to go to your own country?" And he answered, "Nothing. Nevertheless, you must surely let me go." God also raised up another adversary to him, Rezon, the son of Eliada, who had fled from his lord Hadadezer, king of Zobah. He gathered men to himself and became leader of a marauding band after David slew them of Zobah, and they went to Damascus and stayed there and reigned in Damascus. So he was an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon, along with the evil that Hadad did, and he abhorred Israel and reigned over Aram. So, verse 14, the Lord raised up. The Lord raised up. Okay, I wrote down these verses, and I'll have to think why I did that. But these are the verses I wrote down. He, Solomon, the son of David, shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Oh, this is why I did it. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the sons of men. That is why I wrote that down. Because, okay, he raised them up, the enemies, because he's going to punish him with the sons of men. And Hadad of the Edomite royal line. Yeah, Hadad was of the Edomite royal line. And we hear that it came about when David was in Edom. So the Lord was planning this, but when Solomon was still a little kid, or maybe hadn't been born. David was in Edom. Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain. And so this correlates with 2 Samuel chapter 8. The Bible is an amazing book. So it correlates with 2 Samuel chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. And this is a kind of a list of David's conquests after he became king of the United Kingdom. It said, so David made a name for himself when he returned from killing 18,000 Arameans in the Valley of Salt. He put garrisons in Edom. In all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became servants to David, and the Lord helped David wherever he went. So if you put these two passages together, it sounds like David slaughtered the Edomites. It took him 6 months. Joab was in there in Edom, chasing them down and killing them for 6 months until he'd cut off every male in Edom. And this was part of David's conquests. This is why the Lord said, I don't want you to build the temple, because David had been going around doing things like this. And not that it was sinful, because, he was... And so Hadad was a boy, and he had escaped from this basic genocide that David was carrying out. So the Lord had a rod of discipline prepared for Solomon sitting down in Egypt. It's just like the flood, right? We learned about the flood, how the Lord created the earth. He created the earth as a time bomb. Waters beneath, waters above. And it went fine until the sin got so great that the Lord said no. And he had it ready to trigger. He triggered it in a minute. That is the omniscience of God. That is the foreknowledge of God. That is why there's no counsel or no anything against the Lord. You cannot be smart enough to plan against the Lord. That's why Satan he's very intelligent, but he is crazy. Because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of both knowledge and wisdom. Satan does not have that. So he thinks, and this is why all the great dictators do this, like Hitler. He was warned against doing something. I can't remember what battle it was. All his generals says, we can't win this. We can't win this. He says, go, get it, because that is the mind of Satan. That is the mind of Satan, and that is the mind of those who are associated with him. So he went to Egypt as a boy. He grew up and he married the queen's sister. So he was very, Pharaoh was enamored with Hadad. Then verses 20 and 21, sister of Tahpenes bore a son Genubath. Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh, so his son was being raised in the palace. But when he heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, he said, send me away to my own country. So this happened early on. in Solomon's reign when David died. So I have another proverb here that Solomon wrote. Very wise man. If he'd only applied his proverbs. The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So that was... Now, did Hadad have to return? No. He was high on the hog, man. Yeah, I mean, gosh, he married the queen's sister. His son was being raised in the Pharaoh's palace. He had it good. No, he didn't have to go to Egypt, and he couldn't explain why he wanted to. He could not explain why he wanted to. He says, the Pharaoh said to him, "What have you lacked with me, that behold you are seeking to go to your own country?" He said, "Nothing. Nevertheless, you must surely let me go." So he could not tell Pharaoh why. Well, we know why. The Lord is drawing him up there as an instrument. And then the other external threat was this Rezon, who escaped from Hadadezer. Now, Hadadezer was also defeated by David. Hadadezer was north of Damascus. And Hadadezer of Zobah. Hadadezer was the king's name. And that was David defending his northern border. And he conquered that city. And so, yeah, this is from 2 Samuel 8, 5 through 8. 2 Samuel 8, 5 through 8. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 Arameans. Then David put garrisons among the Arameans of Damascus, and the Arameans became servants to David, bringing tribute, and the Lord helped David wherever he went. David took the shields of gold which were carried by the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Betah and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took a very large amount of bronze. Okay, so I wrote a proverb which says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. That's Proverbs 16, verse 7. And so what God was doing here is taking away this proverb because Solomon's ways were no longer pleasing to him. So he, you can live in the midst of your enemies. That's what Psalm 23 says. You set a table for me in the midst of my enemies. Your enemies will be at peace with you when your ways are pleasing to the Lord. The Lord will hold off your enemies. But when your ways are not pleasing, he raises them up and incites them against you. So those are the external enemies of Solomon. But the worst threat was from inside job. Right? Just like Brutus. Et tu, Brutus? Yeah. Okay, so can I get somebody to read 1 Kings 11, verses 26 through 40? Thank you, sir. Good point. Good point. That is a difficulty in the text. Because he says, he offered Jeroboam 10 tribes. He will give Solomon 1 tribe. And the quarterly goes through all sorts of rigmarole and stuff like that, saying, well, Simeon was in Judah, all this and that. I think I have this book called Difficult Bible Passages. It's by J. Carl Laney, which I would recommend. It's good. And he says that the one tribe that was offered to Solomon was the tribe of Benjamin, because Jerusalem was in the territory of Benjamin. Yeah. So, but it says, I think that this is supported by verse 36, which says, but to his son I will give 1 tribe, that my servant David may have a lamp always before me in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen for myself to put my name. And you'll see in the allotments of the cities and the land in Joshua that Jerusalem is in Benjamin. So Judah would have a natural loyalty to the kings of Judah. And the tribe given to Solomon would be Benjamin, and the 10 tribes would be given to Jeroboam. So I think that is how I would deal with that difficulty, but that is a difficulty in the text. There's 12 tribes. It only discusses 11. Where's the other one? So enter Jeroboam. Jeroboam is the anti-hero of the story. Now, Jeroboam is destined to introduce a sin into the northern kingdom that never is turned away from. Never. And that sin is idolatry. So they never shake it. And he is an Ephraimite from the tribe of Ephraim, one of the sons of Joseph. He was capable. He was young. He was industrious, ambitious. Solomon noticed him. And he was appointed by Solomon over the forced labor of both Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph, the tribe of Joseph. So then verse 29 to 32, this prophet encountered, this is a private meeting, so he waited for him outside of Jerusalem on the road in a field, and he made him an offer that was given to him by the Lord, an offer. He prophesied God would give him 10 tribes and leave Solomon one. And the tribe, okay, I already went through that. That's the difficulty we're talking about. So the reason for the tearing away was idolatry, promoted by love of pagan women, which we talked about before. But then for the sake of David, he would not do it for Solomon's life, and we discussed that earlier. How you live your life affects your children later. So then verses 37 and 38, I will take you, Jeroboam, and you shall reign over whatever you desire, and you shall be king over Israel. Then it will be, now listen to this, he gives him the same condition that he gave to David and that he gave to Solomon. It will be that if you listen to all that I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my sight by observing my statutes and my commandments as my servant David did, then I will be with you, and I will build you an enduring house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. That is quite an offer. So he would give him a lasting dynasty if he would follow the Mosaic law. Jeroboam. So now this required faith, didn't it? You have to believe that. Jeroboam had to believe that. And we will learn later that he did not believe that. And that is why our minds need to be renewed. He thought like a politician. And we'll learn later that his family came to a gruesome end because he thought like a politician. And when God offered him an enduring kingdom, if only he would listen to the Mosaic law. That's a warning for us, you know. Now, he did not have the Davidic covenant. So he was hanging on this Mosaic law, you know, and he didn't. So because the Lord goes on and reinstitutes his commitment to the to the Davidic covenant. He says, "Thus I will afflict the descendants of David for this, but not always." But not always. So now Solomon somehow heard about this. This is a private meeting out in a field outside of Jerusalem. Somehow Solomon heard about this, and the quarterly postulates that Jeroboam did not wait for Solomon's death to challenge. So that is their postulate, that he challenged Solomon before his death. And so Solomon it doesn't say Solomon repented of his sin, but he wanted to kill Jeroboam, you know, and get rid of the physical problem. So Solomon never repented, as far as we know. He died in sin. He died in idolatry. But I do believe that we will see Solomon in the millennial kingdom. So anyway, the part that quarterly doesn't go over, it's not too much this time. 1 Kings 11, verses 41 through 43, and 2 Chronicles 9, verses 29 through 31. And basically, basically it just says Solomon died. Estimates he had a 40-year reign. It's estimated he died at the age of 60. Started reigning about the age of 20. And remember, back in the beginning, when he asked for wisdom, God told Solomon that if you obey my commandments, I'll give you a long life. Well, 60 ain't that long. No. So, yeah. So, anyway, that's our...
The Lord said it was long enough.
It was long enough considering what's going on.
Yeah,
yeah.
For 6
yeah.
years.
So anyway.
Wife's telling me what to do.
Yeah.
That's like the end. Amen.